Welcome back to the Tech for Good Live and the Circular Economy podcast as part of the Disruptive Innovation Festival 2018. This is episode 3. If you've not listened to the first 2, what are you doing here? Go back and listen to them. In the previous episode, we looked at practical examples of the circular economy in action, or at least parts of it. We talked about tyres and fridges. A lot about fridges, to be honest. And we also heard how Apple has robots that can dismantle phones with terrifying speed. And then we ended on a bit of a grim note. We were wondering if the waste industry and the 100,000 people who work in it might be at risk. Is this a legitimate fear? What are the unintended consequences of the circular economy? Let's find out. So Tom, what is going to happen to the waste industry if we all go circular? Is that a thing, by the way, going circular?
We can claim it. Claim it now. Cool. So I asked everyone about this. I asked Ken, I asked Amir, and I asked Amanda about this. And they all said exactly the same thing. There's always going to be a waste industry. It might have to change because there'll be people, like the longevity of products will increase. People will keep materials and products in-house inside their organisations. But there'll always be unintended consequences. There'll always be the things that fall out. Even in the MacArthur Foundation's butterfly diagram that we talked about in the first episode, they still have a landfill and energy from waste cycle at the bottom because they understand that that's like the true perfect model that will never exist. Like there's always going to be waste within it and there'll always be jobs for those 100,000 people. The other side of it is quite interesting though, and like it comes into this idea of unintended consequences. So I talked to Amir about this.
Normally when people, students or companies or organizations that we talk to about the circular economy, they talk about systems thinking. They tend to talk more in terms of processes and how things work. Well, that's fine. But processes are only one part of the equation, one part of how things are. When we talk about systems thinking, actually we're talking about complexity, we're talking about dynamics, we're talking about interconnectedness. And so when we say systems thinking, we're talking about interrelationships, we're talking about interconnectedness. We are talking about considering intended and unintended consequences, and that's a big shift for a lot of companies and individuals to consider. You know, when you're making a product, be it a plastic bottle or a car or a smartphone, are you really thinking about the end state of that product when you design it or when you upgrade it? No, you're not. You're probably thinking about cost control, about profit margin, about marketing, about the whiz-bang features of that product. You may not necessarily be thinking about, well, what would happen to this product when it's no longer fit for purpose? How can we avoid waste? Is there other benefits of this product? And that, again, is where systems thinking becomes very useful because it prompts us to think about all of the interrelationships that might exist.
That's quite interesting. It links into something we talk about quite a lot on Tech for Good Live. So we think about how everything's bigger than the tiny little thing that it is. Like everything's bigger than that is connected. And we talk about something called wicked problems, which are problems that are connected to things that seem unrelated to it, but actually if you poke that thing over there, it's going to affect something completely different in another part of the world somehow. And I think that kind of systems thinking, I guess, is supposed to be the anecdote to that.
Yeah, the solution,
antidote.
The antidote to wicked problems. Yes, and I think that is part of it, to make sure that you do take that step back. You have that holistic view of everything, and you go, right, if I produce this product or this service, or if I think about this in this way, what will happen next, or what will happen well after that, and will it have an impact on that?
It's a lot to think about. As he said, that Amir was talking about how designers aren't really thinking about this at the minute when they're designing a product. They're thinking about much other things, profit margins, like durability, but they're not really taking this into account. And we talk about ethical design, though. I mean, it's bigger than just thinking about the circular economy. It's also thinking about privacy by design is a thing we now all need to think about. Accessibility is a thing we all need to think about, which and both of those things a lot of designers still aren't doing. And now there's this whole new concept of the circular economy and systems thinking on top of that. As a designer, you've got a lot to...
But I think actually they all come together. So they are all systems thinking. And it's like, so the idea that the podcast posed was, is there going to be a waste industry? Just like, well, like the terminology waste industry, probably not, because it's that interconnectivity. It'll just get blended into one because everyone will think about what happens next. And it won't be an industry around it. It will just be the next. And that's the thing. So at the moment, I think there's so many compartmentalizing of ideas and like, yes, there's privacy and etc. But actually take a step back, take a breath, and actually really think about your product, your service, your offering, and all of the features that need to be incorporated into it. End of life, protection, security, all of that comes into it. And it takes a long time. But again, you have to start with the end in mind and then work your way back from it.
And as you say, it'll never be perfect. So I guess this whole concept of unintended consequences is obviously that it wasn't intended and you didn't know it was really going to happen. Yeah. Didn't really maybe imagine it happening. Is that right? Is that what you mean by unintended consequences?
Yes, yeah. So kind of like so in the last episode, we kind of talked about the township in Ghana, and Amir touched on it with that idea of like how do you square the circle of if you create a system to take back all of your, say, like iPhones. So back in-house, you disassemble them, you keep all of the rare earths in there, those rivers of cobalt that Amir so eloquently talked about would disappear and dry up, which is good for the environment, but that economy that is based around it has collapsed. That is an unintended consequence of that looking after the environment. So then you start having to like kind of balance all of these different sides of this square of how do you look after the planet, how do you look after people, how do you look after the economies that work within these systems. And then you have to think at a systems level to do that, to solve these wicked problems.
So you're saying if you were that phone manufacturer, you start taking them in-house, the river of cobalt dries up, so therefore the livelihoods of that town dries up. The phone manufacturer should be considering that and doing something about it. Yeah.
And this is how you think in a system. Like you see all the knock-on effects that you've had with your product, and then you work through them all. And then you go, right, where is my burden? Like, what is my burden? It's not just on your materials. It's not just it's on your people. It's on your resources. It's on your time and it's on your effort.
In the circular economy, though, is that the burden is about the waste. So by bringing it all in-house, they're reducing the waste burden. But nobody's holding them to account for the village in Ghana.
Well, in the circular economy, actually, it's like they talk about resources and kind of burden to do with resources, but those resources are around time, people, money, effort, IP, all of these things as well. Like waste and resources is just one kind of strand to that burden. So yeah. But and again, I went and I talked to Ken about this because again, it's really high level thinking, and like it's really complex. And Ken was, like he said, he was at the start when the Ellen MacArthur Foundation started, and I just wanted to ask him about the future state. Where do we go from here with the circular economy?
Now, this zero burden thing, an intelligent look at this could say, look, we can track materials now if they're big ones. What if we molecularly stamped materials, you see, so that you could, I don't know if everybody's seen Blade Runner, but in there they have a look at who made this artificial snake. They had a look at the scale and then read the code number of it. So it's not beyond thought, and I know some, at least one very large firm has had to look at this, about stamping very, very small, all over everything invisibly to the naked eye, stamping the code number. Then you could say, we've gathered all this stuff, and we know who made it. And if they didn't have a very good recovery system in place, well, we just send them the bill. Because that's the responsibility a bit. They didn't recover it well, they didn't have a system where it worked well, they didn't get it back, they didn't put it into a system. So the external cost gets paid because we can say 20% of this garbage we've collected originated in your factory, your PET factory. I think that's where we might go in the very end if we're looking at future scenarios. why not keep a track on the materials forever, even if they end up in small pieces? Because you can allocate costs then. Don't know what you think of that, Tom. I know it's a bit space age, but...
No, I like it. I do like it. I like the space age thinking around it.
I like it from someone who wants the planet to continue existing, but I don't know. I've got a few questions around how corporations would take that. I know AO is like kind of gone there. I know the tyre people have been doing it for ages anyway. Michelin. But like, this is a lot of liability that the companies, this is an extra bill that they're going to have to foot. This is a lot to think about, I think, from the organisation. They're going to have to think of the cost of product, the cost of the manufacture, and now on top of that, the cost of getting rid of the rubbish or paying for the fine for the rubbish. Like, does this work out? Does this work out mathematically? Does it work out from a business perspective?
Well, so this is why Amir looks at it from the business angle, and it comes down to actually the durability of the product. So does it work on a product that will last a year and a half? Probably not. Like, spending all that extra time on your design to think about it, and then making sure that everything is stamped so you know where it goes next, and having systems in place to like take them back in house, no. But when you're talking about the durability of it over, say, a decade, paying that monthly subscription rate every time, like I said before, like, it just makes sense to make it durable and last longer. And the other side of it is this kind of concept that Ken and Amir talk about, is about stock management. Their stock management concept of, if it's theirs, then it's their asset, if they're like having it as a service, which means that company has an additional stock, an additional like kind of money flow, so they can go, right, don't worry, I know that we've got 1,000 items in stock, but we've got 10,000 items out in the world that we know we're going to get back in X amount of times, because that's the life on that product. So we've got all of these materials out there in this service, and we're paying a subscription model for it, and we know how to take them apart in a quickly and effective way.
So somebody's going to have to implement this as well, from the perspective of, so we're talking about these molecular stamping.
Yeah.
In Ken's, like the way he described it, somebody's almost going around scanning everything and totting up a bill. So I guess somebody's going to have to do that as well.
Yeah. And again, very good question. I asked Ken about that one.
The point is, you made a clear point, and probably why your work is so important. We've got to be able to track materials properly in terms of the quality, where it is, how long it's been there, who owns it or doesn't own it.
Yes.
Because otherwise you always get what Bill McDonough calls downcycling, because you can't define the flow. You always have to put it into a lesser use because there's contamination questions. And that's only another cycle from the dump in that case, because it gets more contaminated, more unknown, and then people go, I don't really want that, or it's only good for this. Let's make some railings out of it, which is still a use, but it's not what I think you and I are talking about, which is to keep it in the highest quality for the most time. And so data is a key to this, data of course, and that's why I put in that fantasy thing about let's have molecular stamping, so we can find out who made this.
And what it is.
And what it is, which is the other bit about it, because if we know what it is, we can make a market in it.
Yes, so if it's like, as in this chunk of thing, what is it?
Yeah.
I mean, you could maybe get a ray gun on it. I don't know what they call, mass spectrometer gun, to kind of figure out. That's expensive, it's time consuming.
Yeah, but they're designing these now to more street use.
Yes, oh yes.
Yes, so they're trying to get these tools down to the more street level, so that people who are gathering stuff can go, what have I got?
Yes.
Oh, I know what I've got. Here's a certificate for it, really, just for coding for it.
Yeah.
Then I can sell it. I've got 3 kilos of this. It's this quality.
Exactly.
Do you want it? So data is at the heart of it. You're at the heart of that sort of thing. But it's a long run project before that wonderful land comes into view. But it's really exciting that you are really part of that revolution.
So it's really exciting. And Ken is totally right that data is the key. So there's kind of a thing in the waste industry that there's 2 types of waste data. There's terrible waste data and no waste data. And when we founded Dsposal, we knew it was vital that we had to use tech to make it easy for everybody to improve the data. Because if we understand kind of where those resources are, and there's like this real step into the right direction. I mean, I love the idea of like molecular stamping, allowing resource companies to go out collecting these things and knowing exactly what they are, so they have the highest value when they go back in, and that is fascinating.
It is, but also I have this like idea of people going around collecting rubbish for money because they don't have any. That just, I don't know. I know that isn't what you're saying, but that came to mind.
But isn't that what the waste industry is at the moment? Like,
yeah, true.
Like, as in people going around collecting stuff.
And then getting paid for it. Like, if they didn't have that job, then they might not have any money. So that is that industry anyway. It's quite a lot more refined. Is talking about money and costs as well. So you talk about this monthly income rental system, and is that going to end up costing more for the consumer? Because the way we're talking about it is that, yeah, that actually has a lot of financial benefits for the business. Does that mean it's more expensive for me as a consumer?
Again, I think it comes down to the individual business models, and it comes down to this idea that Amir talks about of the economies of scope rather than the economies of scale. So if businesses branch out and think about ways of doing it differently to make sure, like AO and AO Recycling did, they have a retailing operation, then they go to a logistics operation, then they go to a recycling operation. That's like creating a scope for their business, and it all ties into each other and it all works really, really well. And I think that's a way of keeping costs down for the consumer, because it's neater, it's cleaner as it works through these processes.
Well, you would think as a consumer as well that it'd have to be in some way more cost effective, because you never get to own it. It's a rental system. You are never owning anything. Like, and we know how obsessed people are with having things and owning things at the minute. There's going to take a big shift of mindset. How do you think we'll get there, and what kind of, how are we gonna? There's a lot of power shift, I think, as well in ownership and not ownership, right?
Yeah, I mean, but to be honest, ownership model has only been around for like a few decades. Like, it isn't actually that long. Like, a lot of people used to rent their televisions, they used to rent their homes, they used to rent their cars if they could afford to rent a car in that kind of environment. But we moved away from that because it was undesirable. But actually it was undesirable probably to do with marketing and the way that businesses marketed it. Whereas if we go towards marketing this, like, really, how long have you had that? I've had this for 15 years. You've had that for 15 years? Wow, that's amazing. I wish I had that for 15 years, whatever it might be. And I think we can get there, because then there's this like pride in this durability of products. And then you can, if you've hired it for X amount of time, and then you keep hiring it time and time and time again, like, there's pride in that, and I think people will enjoy that rather than just owning it.
I like to think that we would get there, but I guess my worry about the power thing, and the only real example I'm thinking of is houses. But I think with any rental agreement, like, or if you're paying something off in installments, eventually you have that and your installments stop. And there's a financial stability there where, like, so certainly with a house, I think a lot of people get a mortgage because they're like, oh, that'll be my pension. I'll eventually pay it off and I won't have to pay monthly rent anymore. I won't have to pay that. So there becomes, a time in your life where you're not paying these things. But if you're never owning it, are you always just going to be paying? How is that gonna work? What if you suddenly lose your job and you've got 7 rental things on the go? How is that going to work?
Well, again, it's a growing kind of concept of an economy, and it's not always purely about the as a service models. There are other models out there within the circular economy that doesn't purely revolve around the as a service. It seems to fit better for the kind of the waste argument that I've kind of brought to the table. But yeah, there has to be some controls over and some protection towards people, because, like you said, in my experience of the rental market within housing, there is a power dynamic there that's just a bit skewed. But this is where economies come in, they work together, they get people involved, and they go from there. And I think there will be a period of time to work through these things, but we will get there. So one of the things I'm really interested in as well, to kind of about these kind of ownership models and thinking about all those different financial interactions, is I was talking to Ken about the ideas of cars. So there's this thing in the circular economy, transport as a service, where in the future you will not own a car. You will have access to transport as a service. So you like the Uber is of today kind of thing, but you will access that, and then the person that drives you around will hire that car, and that car might be owned by, say, Jaguar Land Rover or Volkswagen Group or Tesla. And then from there, actually they don't own the materials in their car. What they own is the design of that car and getting it out into people's hands. But Michelin, they own the tyres. We talked about that already. The battery companies will own the batteries of these electric cars. And then you've got the aluminium companies as well.
But batteries are made up of a bunch of stuff. So does that mean that the battery company doesn't own the battery? And does it lead to a weird chain of rental?
Maybe. I don't know. But this is again, you're just playing with concepts, and this is what's really exciting about it. That's moving away from that linear concept, which is take, make, dispose of, to actually let's play with these financial models. So yeah, I was talking to Ken about this, and he goes in some weird and wacky places. So
what are you going to get then? You're going to get a split economy where materials become new asset classes. They're worth trading in futures. Let's see what I'm on the supervisory board of the Webster Foundation in Amsterdam. They look at materials passports, and one of their concerns is that if you get all of the information about buildings and what's in it in terms of material, people start writing financial futures contracts about how much material will be available in 10 years of different types, which is interesting because then it becomes a financialized interest rather than just an environmental interest, which has its downside as well as its upside. And we know very well that if durables become new asset classes because we can track them, it exacerbates the problem of dealing with low-grade stuff, because people will realize there's business advantage in all of the things that are worth keeping and have got value, and we'll just keep them cycling. But it pushes even more pressure on redesigning the products, the materials that are not going to make it into that, and lots of them are not going to make it into that. Also, even if you look at aluminium, to be technical, all of aluminium is an alloy. Every aluminium is alloy, so there's always got something in it. But if you are looking for a specialized use for aluminium, you have to know what's in it, like in aircraft frames. You can't take recycled aluminium and put it in your aircraft. You can in World War II. Well, in fact, no. Remember there was a big campaign in World War II, put your aluminium pans. They didn't make aircraft of it because they already knew we're not quite sure what's in this. It went to make something that was lower grade, still useful aluminium. But you've got that problem then that for high quality uses, you have to keep making new aluminium because you can't deal with the different alloys you've got securely at the moment. So you can't close the loop because it has to be cast alloy in a second use. It can't be wrought aluminium. I think that's the difference.
So yeah, I mean, and I think Ken touches on some really interesting points there, that it's really it can start off and you can kind of get these concepts really nicely in your head, the idea of no zero burden and the circular economy and kinds of the as a service models. So, but then actually quite quickly you start interacting with other concepts that are much more difficult to understand. So one of the things I always get confused in my head, that the as a service model isn't just a subscription model, it's also it's an on-demand model. So you wouldn't be paying for transport as a service every month, 50 quid a month. You would just pay for it when you need it. So, and trying to time.
So that's less like having a what do you call it, lease scheme car.
Yes.
And it's more like those car schemes in city centres where you can
Yes.
go and swipe a card and get a car for an hour.
Yes, exactly.
okay.
And I think sometimes when I personally talk about the circular economy, I get this idea of as a service is just a subscription model, but it isn't. Like, let's talk about washing machines, for example. With that, washing machines, rather than paying every month, you just pay per cycle of wash. So in your home, if it's just you, then you will use it less often than a family of 6. Like, so you'll just pay for it. So then you can kind of control that budget a little bit more as well. If things do go wrong, just not wash your clothes for a bit. But I'm not saying that that's a solution, but it's trying to make sure that you don't fall in that trap of constantly having to pay out for a service that you're not getting value from. But yeah, like, it's tricky. Like, and I think when I started off on this journey reading and interacting with the circular economy, I think I got it. And then I had this idea about the no zero burden. And I was just like, okay, that's fantastic. Like, where does the waste industry fit in? But actually, again, I was compartmentalizing it. And it was like what Amir said at the start of the episode, is this, like, you have to think as a system, as a whole. And then you start going, actually, there will be no death. Like, there won't be an industry that just disappears because it isn't like part of it. It will just fit in with everything else.
But so how do we make this happen? We talk about systems thinking, about how this links to loads of other things that we haven't even considered yet. Do we just plan it? Do we plan the system? Do we model it in advance and then work towards it in little steps? Or do we plan it in advance and say, right, we're implementing it tomorrow, everyone just needs to stop doing what they're doing now, and here's your new job role? Like, how do we get there?
I think Amir from the University of Bradford says it really well.
This is the idea of morphic resonance, which Rupert Sheldrake came up with in the early 90s, late 1980s, which was that natural systems inherit patterns of behavior from within themselves. And I think the thing about the circular economy is that the more and more companies and individuals start to adopt, maybe all, but certainly some of the practices of a circular economy, the more companies and individuals will then accept what it is, and then we'll get this resonance effects where more companies and more people will see the benefits of using a circular approach, so that it does become a natural, what they call a natural memory. Right now, our natural memory in our macroeconomic society is produce more and more stuff and make more and more money. How about a different economic approach, which is, okay, you may want to produce more and more stuff, but how about producing more and more value by extracting value and increasing the life of that asset? Wouldn't that be great? And it's just a different approach, and that's the sort of thing that we're trying to shift thinking on, and try and inform people, teach them, and research in that mold. And that's what the circular economy really is about.
So basically, we have to make it cool, and then because it's cool, everyone will want to do it. Is that what we're saying?
I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think it's, if like some people will start to do it, and because they do it, people will get used to the idea of doing it, and then it will just fit. It'll just work. That will be the way, and then everyone just works towards that. So we have the example of people doing it now. You've got Michelin and you've got AO.com. They're doing it, and I think more people will just start engaging in it, and then we'll be there.
That sounds easy.
Yes. No, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to be a lot of stuff.
How long do you think it's going to take?
I don't. Well, it's already started, and I think
3 years.
Well, it's one of those things. I think it'll just be there. Like one day, you'll be like, "Oh, we used to do things so differently," but like,
really, do you think like in years' time, my grandkids will be like, it's just part of their day to day, and I'll like bring out this podcast and be like, "Oh, we didn't used to have it like this in my day," and they'll listen to it and they'll be like, "Ha ha ha, you were so primitive."
Yeah, I think, and like it's just like it's marginal gains. It's about becoming more and more effective, and it's about one day we'll just look back and be like, oh, look at how far we've come. And it's just a matter of time. It's exciting.
I can't wait for the day where we're all laughing at how stupid we were because of this podcast. We're going to play it in like 30 years' time.
Yeah, maybe. That might happen. But let's be positive. Let's not laugh at ourselves now, but let's think about the journey that we're going to go on.
Okay. That was a bit weirdly positive from you, Tom.
I'm always positive when it comes to the circular economy.
Thinking back over these conversations and interviews, I feel encouraged and a little inspired. I still have my doubts. Not doubts in the merit or intention of the circular economy, or in people like Tom, Ken, Amanda, Anthony and Amir, who are championing it. My doubts are in the rest of us. Tom said way back in episode 1 that people are the problem. This has so often been the case throughout history. But we managed to get out of the cave and cross oceans and mountains and build industry. We created poetry and music and have improved ourselves time and time again. The circular economy is a big change, but as a species we need to change and we need to be open to it. Massive corporations need to be on board and not look to exploit their customers, but build a better world for everyone. And it seems like they can do this and still make their profits. Hopefully one day our grandkids will be able to look back on our linear economy and laugh at how primitive we were. That the circular economy will eventually just be the economy. I'm looking forward to finding out. Thanks for listening. This podcast wouldn't exist without Tom Passmore and Sophie Walker from Dsposal. Music has been graciously provided by George Fell. Podcast.co make all of this possible thanks to the shiny podcast studio they provide. Thanks to the Disruptive Innovation Festival. I've been, and will continue to be, Rebecca Ray Evans. Thanks also to Paul Jakubowski and Johnny Ray Evans from the Tech for Good Live team.